It's been a pretty strong decade for Lithuania at Eurovision. They started off the 2020s as favorites to win the contest, and although that year ended up getting cancelled, they followed up with a top 10 finish and their second best result ever. They've also kept up a healthy qualification record since then, putting them among just a handful of countries that have reached every grand final of the 2020s. Today we're taking a look at some of the artists that are in the running to represent Lithuania in 2025, with the hope of keeping that momentum going. Now, this is a national selection that I've been eyeing to do a review of for a while. It's easily one of the largest and definitely one of the most eclectic when you consider the range of musical styles that you can get. And lately, we've been seeing the songs that win the selection and go on to Eurovision have been attracting a decent-sized fan base. To shed some light on some of the finalists that we have in this year's edition of Eurovizija.LT is Rytis from Eurodena, which is a Lithuanian Eurovision blog, and I started out by asking him how the general audience has been seeing Eurovision lately.
Lithuania is very much a Eurovision nation. I think it's one of the platforms where we get to support our own artists, and I think it's really important for us. And I also think a part of its popularity is because we still haven't won it, and I think we kind of hold this grudge because Estonia and Latvia have both done it before. We never have that perfect song, and I think many people believe that in 2020 it could have been a year for Lithuania. However, you know, we had 21 instead, and it was one of the strongest years ever, so we only got 8th, but I think it's still a great achievement nevertheless.
Tell me a little bit about how Eurovision has been received this decade because of the string of qualifications. Has it made Lithuanians more invested in Eurovision at all?
I think generally the interest in Eurovision as a contest has remained the same because it was high in the first place. However, I think what may have changed a little bit is that maybe we're not so much, satisfied with being in the middle of the scoreboard anymore. And I think many of us Euro fans, we would like our best entry not to be "We are the winners" anymore.
We are the winners of Eurovision. We are.
It's kind of old at this point, I think, although it's a classic song and everyone knows it in the country. We had great entries since then, and that's why people kind of want this period to be over.
Now, one thing that does seem to have changed is the attitude around language. Each entry since 2022 has been partially or completely in Lithuanian. Before then, the vast majority were in English, and the handful that weren't didn't often do very well in the contest.
There was this general perception that Lithuanian is not understood enough for it to be on the Eurovision stage. But I think with Monika Liu, it was extremely important for her to qualify because it showed that the language is not a barrier. And I think we had a really nice streak with Monika Linkytė later, and then we had a fully Lithuanian song last year. And I can tell you for sure, we will have a fully Lithuanian entry this year.
Of the 12 finalists, we're going to be looking at 5 of them in detail and then wrapping up with a few mentions at the end. The first one that we're going to start with, as usual, is the one that's tipped to be the big favorite. Katarsis is bringing a style of song that is far from Eurovision typical. Even just considering the dark and brooding atmosphere in this alt-rock package would be plenty to distinguish itself from everything else that's been selected so far. Their performance is by far the most popular on YouTube. At the time of recording this video, it's currently sitting at 185,000 views, which is twice as much as the second most viewed song by Liepa. And part of what some people might find appealing about the song is that it's capturing a feeling rather than trying to tell a specific story.
The song itself, it's hard to interpret its lyrics because they're quite abstract, but basically it means your eyes. And it's a very sad song because it talks about pain, it talks about not being scared and, stuff like that. Some people have connected it to the fear of war. Some people have connected it to other things. The artists themselves, they said the song doesn't carry a specific message and you can interpret it in any way you want.
Now, I think it's quite clear to most people that this would be a risky choice, even if it stands out for having the sound that it has. Also, from a visual point of view, as it exists right now, it's a pretty typical band performance, and so part of making this as successful as it can be will be fleshing out the visuals so that they're more TV ready. This can sometimes be a challenge for bands, but at least we can say that in the 2020s, there have been several examples of successful band performances at Eurovision, so there's a lot to draw inspiration from. And so with a more tactical approach to the visuals, I think this could be a pretty solid choice. Still risky, but considering the local support that it has, I think it would be a risk worth taking. You might not recognize the name Lion Ceccah, but if you've seen previous editions of Lithuania's selection, you might remember him as Alan Chico. He often performs with highly striking looks, sometimes in drag, and so if you've seen any of those performances, you might have made a connection based on visuals alone. Apart from standing out in that way, the song that he's bringing has quite an unusual blend of genres, it has a number of tempo changes, and it's going to be very hard to forget. And according to Redis, there's more going on than what people might realize.
I don't think you can actually tell that from the first listen, even as a native speaker. But when you actually go into what Lion Ceccah has posted on Instagram, and I think maybe talked about in interviews, the song itself is about sexual abuse and Stockholm Syndrome, I think, as well. So it deals with these complex and you would say disturbing topics. What most people have issue with is like the middle part of the song, where it goes into this sort of mix of sounds. We call it sometimes a salad of sounds. When you take the theme of the song into consideration, it kind of makes sense that the middle of the song is disturbing, because you can see it as a kind of like a journey of life, and then there's this event that kind of disturbs you and shakes you to your core, and then you have to kind of live with that. I think when you look at it like this, you start to appreciate the song more. But also it comes down, can the viewers understand everything it carries? And definitely not from the first time. So maybe that's the biggest challenge for this song, but I think nevertheless, it is a very compelling act.
Now, understanding the context of the song definitely helped me look at it differently. The first time I watched it, I have to admit that parts of it looked just a bit goofy to me, but with a deeper understanding of what the meaning is, I look at it with a lot more kindness than I did before, and I do actually think that I can connect to the song in a way that it's meant to be connected to. Now, that probably won't be the case for everyone that watches this, and as we mentioned already, the lack of accessibility might be what works against it. But even without the context, it's definitely a gripping performance. And if it gets enough public support to actually win, then it's at least resonating with enough people to justify a place at Eurovision. Petunija is an artist that is returning to Eurovizija.LT after only having competed 2 years ago. In that year, she finished 4th in the grand final with the piano ballad Love of My Life. This time around, she's got a completely different style, pairing this haunting electronic bed with her delicate vocals, and through the song, she's tackling some important social themes as well.
She was inspired by this author who was, you could call her like the first Lithuanian feminist. The story itself that Petunija is referring to is basically about the role of women in society. It's not saying anything directly, but you can feel it that it is about that, and about the frustration that you have to be, nice, you have to be a good girl, and all those, expectations, I would say the burden of expectations.
Now, before Katarsis had emerged as the frontrunner, this was an early favorite. It still appears at the top of some polls, and it seems to be a song that could be resonating more with the international audience. There was, however, some criticism of the performance being a bit underwhelming, and given the energy of the song, I would say that it appears to be a bit too static, but there could be reasons for that within the context of the song.
For example, she doesn't pronounce the words very clearly in her song, because she explained that she wants it to feel like, she can't really say it out loud. So she's like, talking like this because she's had enough. So maybe the static performance could also be that she's not allowed to move too much, and she's about to explode maybe in some way.
Now, Petunija would have had enough time to make some adjustments to adapt to the criticism. If, however, there is an intention to limit her movement to get the message across, I wouldn't expect anything vastly different for the final. What I would say is that this kind of contrast between having a high energy song and limited movement can work if it's done in the right way. I think the key is that it has to be treated like every individual shot is its own work of art, so that there's variation. If the shots look too repetitive, then it's very easy to lose the viewer and miss out on that engagement. And so if this is able to be elevated for the final, then I think this could be a real moment in the show and definitely worthy of Eurovision too. Liepa is one of the artists that was originally eliminated from the contest, but then brought back as a wild card. Before her semi-final, the song ended up getting a lot of attention online and even got some radio airplay, and that put her in a good enough position to come second in the televote. But because there was a tie for second place, and Eurovisija.LT's voting system preferences the jury vote, she ended up losing out to Amorelu.
I think what's important to add here is that the semi-finals are filmed in advance. The juries, when they give out their points, they give them out at the filming of the semi, and the televotes they vote live when it's live on air. We had the shooting of the semi-final, then we had a 2-week gap, and during that gap she released her song. She got there were reactions. What I think is unfair in this case, or like generally in this system, is that the two sets of points are given out in different contexts.
Now, this wasn't a matter of changing the rules in the middle of the game. The broadcaster actually reserves the right to introduce wildcards if they choose to. And fortunately, they're doing so in the interests of the public. I mean, it also kind of points out a flaw in their system, but at least they have a workaround. Now, with respect to the song itself, we've seen a number of songs at other national selections that tap into that early 2000s Eurotrance sound. We even have one that has already been selected to represent Belgium this year. So it's definitely a sound that's on trend, and it also happens to be tackling some similar themes to Petunija's song.
How she describes it is like, again, all these expectations on women, how they should look, how they should be, just basically this pressure that the society puts on them, and that they should really live for themselves and not for others. I think that's the how she frames it. The main line goes, "Would you still love me without the ambers and the long hair?" It's a fun song, even though like the content of it is not perhaps super positive, but that's why Liepa might look concerned maybe in the performance and stuff like that. But still, it's a very much like a dance, like a very pop track, and I think many people will like it.
Now, because this nearly missed out on the final because of the lack of jury support, it is fair to say that this probably is less likely to land in the top 3 in the first round of voting and then move on to the super final. If this were to still somehow win, I do think that it could be a good choice for Eurovision. Of course, we do have to consider that apart from Belgium, there are other songs of this style that are in other selections, and I'm thinking of Denmark and Estonia specifically. And so if they all get selected, they might find this song in a cluster of Eurotrance style songs. And so if the goal is to go beyond the middle of the scoreboard, this one is probably not the best choice, but it's at least a respectable entry that could have the potential to do well, even do better than some of the songs that it might get compared to.
Walking back, this ain't my name. Say my name, this ain't my name.
Black Biceps is the other act that was brought back from the semifinals as a wildcard. In this case, their song actually got the most public votes out of all entries across all the semifinals, but got eliminated due to a 3-way tie. Now, each of the songs that we've talked about so far are on the more serious side. This is really the first one and one of the few in the entire selection that amps up the fun, and that could be exactly what works in its favor.
I think here they could be a contender to win the televote when you think about it, because we have a very dark themed final in general, so they will really stand out, and they're also closing the show. So I think they could really, take that televote win. However, to get into the super final, you also need some jury love, and looking at the scores right now, I mean, they could be the third act to get into the super final, and then we would see how that goes. But I wouldn't say it's very likely that Black Biceps they can win the whole thing, but they could score well in the televotes.
I don't think there's too much to dissect about the entry itself. It's fun. It does seem to have some parallels with We Are the Winners, like the fact that it name drops Eurovision in the song, and also this dancer looks familiar if you ask me. It also has a full brass section, which we know has meme potential. Again though, if the goal is to get higher than the middle of the scoreboard, I don't necessarily think this would be the most effective choice. But if people are in the mood for something fun, then I think this would be fine. And it would be different enough from the other songs that we have so far that are also trying to capture that kind of fun atmosphere in order to justify its place. Now, these are just 5 of the 12 songs that are in the running to represent Lithuania this year, and any of them have the chance at winning, but these are the ones that seem to be the most likely based on the voting patterns and the external success outside of the selection. The consensus is still that Katarsis has the best chance at winning, but of course we'll need to see how these 12 songs compare to one another, because ultimately that's what's reflected in the voting. Now, if I were going off of personal taste, the entry that I would be most excited for would be Petunia's song, because it just grabbed me from the beginning. I really like the combination of sounds that it has, and I think that if they're able to elevate it a little bit more, then it could be really special. But when looking at all the options here, including the big favorite, I think that there are a lot of good choices here, and I would be happy for any of them. Thank you so much, Ritas, for all the information that you provided. I'm really glad that we connected, and thank you all for watching. Be sure to let me know in the comments which song you would like to see represent Lithuania this year, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. There'll be more videos on the way. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.